Grandpa, tonight they're going to take everything. The house, the accounts, you, 8:02 p.m., right as I was cutting my birthday cake. Emma's face went white as snow, her tiny hand shaking as she grabbed mine. I smiled, but something cold crept into my chest. They think I'm old, stupid, that I can't tell who's being sweet and who's sharpening their knives behind my back. But they're wrong, dead wrong. Tonight they think they'll walk away with everything I've worked 70 years to build. My house, my savings, my dignity. But they're about to learn that this old man still has a few tricks up his sleeve. While they've been plotting in whispers and fake smiles, I've been 3 steps ahead. Tonight they'll leave with nothing but shame and a hard lesson about underestimating their father. Let me tell you how it all went down. The living room was packed with fake smiles and cheaper wine. My 75th birthday party, they called it. More like a funeral preview where the corpse gets to watch everyone divide up his belongings. My son Michael stood by the fireplace checking his phone every 30 seconds like he was expecting news from the stock market. His wife Sarah kept glancing at her watch, probably calculating how long this charade needed to last before they could get down to business. My daughter Linda arrived late as usual, with that practiced apologetic smile she'd been perfecting since high school. Her husband Frank immediately started eyeing my vintage whiskey collection like he was already planning which bottles to pack first. But Emma, my 10-year-old granddaughter, she was different. While the adults performed their rehearsed birthday theater, she stayed close to me, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Kids see things adults think they're hiding. They hear conversations through thin walls and pick up on tensions that grown-ups pretend don't exist. Emma had been quieter than usual for weeks, avoiding eye contact during our usual Saturday morning pancake breakfasts. Tonight she looked terrified. The birthday cake was one of those expensive bakery jobs that nobody really wanted, but everyone felt obligated to praise. Sarah had ordered it probably the same way she'd order flowers for my actual funeral. Vanilla with buttercream roses, perfectly generic and utterly forgettable. As I stood to make the ceremonial first cut, Emma suddenly appeared at my elbow. Her whisper was so quiet I almost missed it over the forced laughter and clinking glasses. Grandpa, tonight they're going to take everything. The house, the accounts, you. I kept cutting the cake, my hands steady, despite the earthquake in my chest. Around us, the conversation continued about property taxes and how difficult it must be for me to maintain such a large house at my age. Michael was already talking about assisted living facilities like I wasn't standing 3 feet away. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were discussing my incompetence while I was the one feeding them, housing their family gatherings, and still sharp enough to balance my own checkbook every month. Emma's warning confirmed what I'd suspected for months. The hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered a room. The sudden interest in my financial affairs from children who hadn't asked about my well-being in years. The way they'd started treating me like I was already gone, just a placeholder keeping their inheritance warm. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than they'd been planning it. 3 months ago, I'd installed security cameras throughout the house. Not the obvious kind that scream surveillance, but tiny devices hidden in picture frames and decorative objects. The kind of equipment that's gotten so advanced and affordable that even a supposedly senile old man could order them online and set them up himself. I'd also been keeping detailed records of every conversation, every visit, every seemingly innocent question about my will and my accounts. The most telling evidence came from their assumption that I was too old-fashioned to understand modern technology. They'd been discussing their plans over text messages, emails, and social media, never imagining that the old man they were plotting against had been screenshooting everything. Michael's messages to Linda about power of attorney, Sarah's Google searches for elder care lawyers, Frank's research into property values in my neighborhood. They'd created a digital paper trail that would make any prosecutor's job embarrassingly easy. As I handed out pieces of cake, I watched them perform their concern. Linda worried about me living alone in such a big house. Michael suggested I might be happier somewhere with more support and less responsibility. Sarah wondered aloud if I was keeping up with my medications and appointments. Each comment was carefully crafted to sound loving while building a case for my incompetence. But I wasn't the confused old man they needed me to be. My mind was sharp, my finances were in perfect order, and I'd been planning my response to their betrayal with the same strategic thinking that had built my successful construction business 40 years ago. The difference was that back then I was building something positive. Tonight I was constructing their downfall. Emma stayed close to me throughout the evening, her young face etched with worry that broke my heart. She was the only innocent person in that room, caught between her love for her grandfather and her loyalty to parents who were about to destroy themselves. I made a mental note to protect her from the worst of what was coming. She'd done her best to warn me, and I wouldn't forget that courage. As the evening wore on, the adults grew more animated, fueled by wine and anticipation. They thought they were about to solve all their problems. Michael's recent business failures, Linda's mounting credit card debt, Sarah's expensive lifestyle that my son couldn't actually afford, Frank's gambling habits that he thought nobody knew about. My assets were their golden ticket, and they could practically taste the victory. But while they celebrated prematurely, I was making final preparations. A quick text to my lawyer, a call to my accountant, and a message to someone they'd never suspect was on my side. The pieces were in place, the trap was set, and all that remained was watching them walk straight into it. The birthday party ended with hugs and promises to visit more often. As they gathered their coats and leftover cake, Michael casually mentioned that he'd like to sit down with me soon to discuss some important matters. Linda echoed the sentiment, suggesting we needed to have a family meeting about my future. Sarah offered to help me organize my paperwork, and Frank volunteered to look at my investment portfolio. Their concern was touching, really, almost convincing if you didn't know what I knew. As the last car pulled out of my driveway, I stood at the window watching their taillights disappear into the night. Emma's small face was pressed against the rear window of Michael's sedan, looking back at the house with eyes that held too much knowledge for a 10-year-old. Tomorrow, they'd make their move. Tomorrow they'd learn that underestimating a man who'd survived the construction business, raised 2 ungrateful children, and buried a wife he'd loved for 50 years was the biggest mistake of their lives. Tonight I had final preparations to make. The call came at 9:30 a.m. sharp, right after my morning coffee and newspaper. Michael's voice carried that practiced tone of concerned authority that he'd probably rehearsed in the mirror. "Dad, we need to talk? We're all coming over this afternoon. There are some things we need to discuss about your situation." The way he said situation made it clear this wasn't a request. It was an ambush dressed up as an intervention. I played my part perfectly. Confused, slightly defensive, asking what this was about while secretly reviewing the checklist I'd prepared weeks ago. Camera positions confirmed. Recording devices activated. Legal documentation secured in my safe. Witnesses standing by. My performance as a bewildered old man was about to earn me an Oscar because I needed them to believe they were dealing with someone who couldn't see their con coming. They arrived like a military operation. Michael, in his best suit briefcase in hand, playing the role of responsible son. Linda clutched a folder of what I assumed were carefully selected documents, designed to prove my incompetence. Sarah brought a tablet probably loaded with research about elder care facilities and their costs. Frank carried himself like a man about to inherit a construction business he'd never worked a day to build. Even Emma was there, looking miserable and avoiding eye contact. The living room became their courtroom, and I was the defendant who didn't know he was on trial. They arranged themselves strategically, Michael taking the leadership position in my favorite armchair, the others forming a semicircle that blocked my access to the door. It was psychological warfare disguised as family concern, and they executed it with the precision of people who'd been planning this moment for months. Michael opened with statistics about elderly accidents in large homes. Linda presented documentation of my supposed forgetfulness, citing times I'd allegedly repeated stories or forgotten appointments. Sarah had researched the financial burden of maintaining my property, complete with charts showing how much money I was supposedly wasting on upkeep I could no longer handle. Frank, bless his transparent heart, couldn't hide his excitement as he discussed the potential of selling the house and investing the proceeds more wisely. What they didn't know was that their intervention was being recorded from 6 different angles. The small devices I'd installed captured not just their words, but their body language, their exchanged glances, and the moments when their masks slipped to reveal the greed underneath. Every accusation of my incompetence was being documented alongside evidence of their coordination and premeditation. The centerpiece of their presentation was a power of attorney document that Michael produced with theatrical timing. He explained how this would allow them to help me manage my affairs more effectively, to protect me from making financial mistakes, and to ensure my care as I aged. The language was loving, but the effect would be complete control over everything I'd worked to build. My house, my accounts, my investments, my independence, all of it would transfer to people who'd been planning my legal death before my biological one. But here's where their plan started unraveling, though they didn't know it yet. 3 weeks ago, I'd had my own meetings with medical professionals, not the ones they'd probably contacted, but independent doctors who could evaluate my mental competence without bias. I'd undergone comprehensive cognitive testing, psychological evaluation, and medical examination. The results, sealed in my lawyer's office, would demolish any claims of diminished capacity. I'd also been in contact with Adult Protective Services, not as a victim, but as a concerned citizen reporting suspected elder financial abuse. The social worker assigned to my case had been quietly investigating my family's activities, documenting their behavior patterns, and examining the evidence I'd provided. Their intervention today was walking straight into a professionally documented trap. As Michael pushed the power of attorney papers across my coffee table, I noticed Emma fidgeting in the corner. Her 10-year-old conscience was eating her alive, watching her parents destroy her grandfather while pretending to save him. Children understand justice in ways that adults forget, and she knew what she was witnessing wasn't right. I played my role beautifully, expressing confusion about the legal documents, asking questions that made me sound overwhelmed and uncertain. But while they saw hesitation, I was actually reading every word carefully, noting the scope of power they were requesting and the speed with which they wanted it implemented. This wasn't gradual assistance, it was immediate and total control. Linda reinforced Michael's presentation with emotional manipulation, tears flowing as she described her fears about my safety and well-being. She painted vivid pictures of me falling downstairs, forgetting to pay bills, or being taken advantage of by scammers. The irony was breathtaking, considering she was participating in the biggest scam of my life. Sarah presented the practical benefits of their intervention, showing me glossy brochures for assisted living facilities that looked more like luxury hotels than nursing homes. She emphasized the social opportunities, the medical support, and the freedom from household responsibilities. What she didn't mention were the costs, which would consume my savings in less than 5 years, leaving nothing for Emma's education or emergencies. Frank's contribution was the most transparently self-serving. He outlined his plans for managing my construction business assets, selling equipment and properties that could generate immediate cash flow. He spoke about my legacy as if it were already his to dispose of, describing how my life's work could be more efficiently monetized under his guidance. The emotional pressure was intense, designed to overwhelm an elderly person into compliance. They took turns expressing their love and concern, painting my resistance as dangerous stubbornness that put everyone at risk. They created urgency by suggesting that waiting would only make things worse, that every day I remained independent was another day closer to disaster, but I wasn't the frightened old man they needed me to be. I was a construction worker who'd dealt with pressure and deadlines his entire career. I was a business owner who'd negotiated contracts and managed employees. I was a husband who'd made life and death medical decisions during my wife's final illness. Their psychological pressure felt like a gentle breeze compared to storms I'd weathered. As their presentation reached its climax, I made my move. I asked for time to think about everything they'd presented, to consult with my own advisors, and to make sure I understood the implications of such important decisions. Their faces showed barely controlled frustration, but they couldn't push too hard without revealing their true motivations. Michael suggested that waiting was dangerous, that my hesitation proved I wasn't thinking clearly. Linda worried that my indecision would lead to the very accidents and mistakes they were trying to prevent. Sarah offered to help me contact lawyers and financial advisors, probably ones they'd already spoken to. Frank suggested that families should handle family business, keeping outsiders from complicating simple decisions. I stood my ground politely but firmly, insisting on time to consider their proposal. As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, I could see them exchanging worried glances. Their timeline was being disrupted. Their carefully planned intervention had failed to achieve immediate results, and they were learning that their supposedly incompetent father was more difficult to manipulate than expected. Emma lingered as the adults headed for the door, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that afternoon. In that moment, she seemed to understand that her grandfather wasn't the helpless victim her parents believed him to be. There was hope in her expression, and maybe a little relief that the man she loved might not be as defenseless as everyone assumed. After they left, I sat in my living room reviewing the footage their intervention had provided. Every camera had captured their performance, perfectly documenting their coordination, their prepared materials, and their obvious disappointment when I didn't immediately surrender control of my life. They'd given me everything I needed to destroy their case before they even filed it. Tomorrow, they'd probably increase the pressure, maybe bring in medical professionals they'd consulted or lawyers they'd retained. They might even suggest that my refusal to accept help was itself evidence of diminished capacity. But I was ready for whatever came next, armed with evidence they didn't know existed, and allies they'd never suspect. The crisis call came at 6:47 a.m., designed to catch me confused and vulnerable in those foggy moments between sleep and consciousness. Linda's voice was pitched at maximum panic as she explained that I'd apparently missed an important medical appointment, forgotten to pay my property taxes, and left my front door unlocked all night. According to her breathless report, neighbors were concerned, my doctor's office was worried, and the county was threatening legal action over delinquent payments. None of it was true, of course. I'd verified every claim within minutes of hanging up the phone. My medical appointments were current, my taxes were paid months in advance, and my door had been properly locked since I'd installed a smart security system that sent notifications to my phone. But the fabricated emergency served their purpose perfectly, creating artificial urgency that was supposed to panic me into accepting their help immediately. Michael arrived 30 minutes later with a notarized power of attorney document legal papers that would grant him immediate authority over my medical and financial decisions. He'd clearly been waiting nearby, probably parked around the corner while Linda made her crisis call. His briefcase contained everything needed to assume control of my life in a single morning, from bank authorization forms to medical proxy designations. But while they'd been orchestrating their fake emergency, I'd been preparing my own surprise. The live stream setup in my home office had been tested and retested over the past week, connected to multiple social media platforms, and ready to broadcast at a moment's notice. Today's performance was going to have a much larger audience than my family expected. Sarah arrived next, clutching printed emails that allegedly showed my confusion and forgetfulness. She'd apparently been corresponding with my doctor's office, my bank, and various service providers, documenting instances of my supposed incompetence. The emails looked official, but I'd already confirmed with each organization that no such communications had occurred. She'd created an entire fictional narrative of my decline supported by forged documentation. Frank brought muscle to their operation, suggesting that we needed to act quickly before my confusion led to serious consequences. He painted vivid scenarios of financial predators targeting vulnerable seniors' home invasion risks for elderly people living alone and medical emergencies that could prove fatal without proper supervision. His fear-mongering was designed to terrify me into submission. Emma sat in the corner looking absolutely miserable, her young face reflecting the moral conflict of watching her parents destroy her grandfather. She tried to warn me, done her best to prepare me for their attack, and now she was being forced to witness their betrayal firsthand. Her presence was probably meant to provide emotional leverage, using my love for her as another tool in their manipulation toolkit. The morning's events followed a carefully choreographed script. Linda presented the alleged evidence of my incompetence, while Michael explained the legal solutions. Sarah offered practical support for implementing their intervention, while Frank emphasized the urgency of immediate action. They took turns applying pressure, never giving me time to think or respond, overwhelming me with accusations and demands. But I wasn't the confused victim they believed they were dealing with. While they performed their crisis intervention, I was quietly activating recording devices and preparing for the most important broadcast of my life. At exactly 10:30 a.m., I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead went to my office and initiated a live stream that would change everything. The audience started small, just a few dozen followers from my surprisingly popular TikTok account, where I'd been sharing construction stories and life advice. But word spread quickly as viewers realized they were watching something extraordinary unfold in real time. Within minutes, hundreds of people were tuned in to watch an elderly man defend himself against his own family's betrayal. I returned to the living room with my phone discreetly positioned to capture the entire scene. My family continued their intervention, unaware that their every word was being broadcast to a growing audience of witnesses. The chat exploded with outrage as viewers heard Linda's fabricated concerns, Michael's legal manipulations, and Frank's transparent greed. The turning point came when Michael produced documents showing unauthorized changes to my bank accounts. He'd apparently contacted my financial institutions, claiming to be my representative, requesting information about my assets and attempting to add his name to my accounts. The papers in his briefcase weren't just power of attorney forms, they were evidence of attempted financial fraud. I made my move during Sarah's presentation about assisted living facilities. Addressing my phone's camera directly, I calmly explained to my audience what they were witnessing. "This is my 75th birthday week," I said, "and these are my children trying to steal everything I've worked for. They think I'm too old and stupid to stop them, but they're about to learn otherwise." The livestream audience exploded past 1,000 viewers as people shared the broadcast across social media platforms. Comments poured in from outraged viewers who recognized elder abuse in action. Some viewers were attorneys offering legal advice. Others were seniors sharing similar experiences with greedy relatives. The story was going viral in real time. My family's reaction to discovering the livestream was priceless. Michael's professional composure cracked as he realized their private intervention was being broadcast to strangers. Linda went pale when I read some of the viewer comments aloud, particularly those questioning her parenting and moral character. Sarah frantically tried to grab my phone while Frank demanded I stop recording immediately. But the damage was done, and I wasn't finished yet. I calmly retrieved a folder from my safe, the one containing 3 months of documented evidence about their planning and preparation. Bank records showing their financial desperation, email printouts revealing their coordination, and screenshots of their research into elder care fraud. Every piece of evidence was time-stamped and verified, creating an unshakable case. The live stream audience watched in fascination as I presented each document methodically. Michael's business failures and mounting debts, Linda's credit card problems and shopping addiction, Sarah's expensive lifestyle funded by money. They didn't have Frank's gambling losses and desperate need for quick cash. Their intervention wasn't about my welfare, it was about their financial crisis. Even more damaging were the recordings I'd made of their previous visits' conversations, where they discussed their plans with casual cruelty. Linda joking about me being too senile to notice money missing from my accounts. Michael calculating how long I might live and how to maximize their inheritance. Sarah researching the fastest ways to gain control of an elderly person's assets. Frank discussing which of my possessions they'd sell first. The viewer count passed 5,000, as I played selected audio clips, each one more damning than the last. The chat filled with demands for justice, calls to contact authorities, and expressions of support for my situation. People were screenshotting everything, ensuring that evidence of their betrayal would exist permanently across multiple platforms. My family's facade completely collapsed as they realized the scope of their exposure. Michael threatened legal action against me for recording private conversations, apparently unaware that I lived in a one-party consent state where his permission wasn't required. Linda demanded I delete everything immediately, her panic making her forget the loving daughter performance. Sarah accused me of manipulating the situation, projecting her own behavior onto me with perfect irony. Frank made the mistake of trying to physically grab my phone, an action that was broadcast live to thousands of witnesses. The chat exploded with warnings and advice as viewers watched an elderly man being physically threatened by his son-in-law. Several viewers mentioned they were contacting local authorities on my behalf, turning my family's private scheme into a very public criminal matter. The live stream continued for another hour as police arrived, alerted by concerned viewers who'd provided my address and situation details. Officers found themselves walking into a domestic dispute that was being broadcast live to an audience that had grown past 10,000 viewers. The evidence of attempted elder abuse was overwhelming, documented in real time and witnessed by thousands of people across multiple platforms. As my family was escorted from my home, I addressed my audience one final time. "Thank you for witnessing what just happened here," I said. "This is what elder abuse looks like when families think they can get away with it." But they forgot that some of us old folks still have fight left in us, and we're not going down without a battle. The live stream ended with my family gone, police reports filed, and thousands of strangers who'd become invested in my story. The video would be saved, shared, and discussed across social media platforms for days to come. My family's reputation was destroyed, their plans were exposed, and their attempt to steal my life had backfired spectacularly. Emma was the only one who looked back as they left, her young face showing relief that her grandfather had survived their attack. She'd tried to warn me, and now she'd seen that her warning had been heard and acted upon. The courage she'd shown in that whispered birthday warning had helped save everything they'd tried to steal. Mrs. Rodriguez had been my housekeeper for 12 years, but she was much more than that. She was a witness, a friend, and as it turned out, a secret keeper of evidence that would demolish any remaining credibility my family thought they had left. Maria Elena Rodriguez was a 8-year-old immigrant from Guatemala who'd cleaned houses across America while putting 3 children through college. She understood hard work, family loyalty, and the difference between people who earned their success and those who tried to steal it. The morning after my livestream revelation, Maria arrived for her regular Thursday cleaning with a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. Inside were 12 years of observations, photographs, and recorded conversations that painted a devastating picture of my family's long-term planning and casual cruelty. She'd been documenting their behavior since my wife's funeral, when she'd first noticed how differently they treated me when I was grieving and vulnerable. Maria had witnessed conversations they'd never imagined were being heard. She'd cleaned around them while they discussed my finances, my health, and their plans for my future with the same casual tone they'd used to discuss weekend dinner plans. Her English was better than they'd assumed, her memory was sharper than they'd realized, and her moral compass was stronger than their consciences. The evidence she'd collected would have impressed a federal investigator. Photographs of documents they'd left on my kitchen table during family meetings showing their research into power of attorney procedures and elder care costs. Audio recordings made on her phone during conversations they'd had in my presence, apparently believing that a housekeeper was invisible and irrelevant. Email printouts they'd carelessly discarded in my trash, discussing strategies for convincing me to sign legal documents. But Maria's most damaging evidence was personal testimony about their treatment of me during my wife's illness and after her death. She'd watched them circle like vultures during Margaret's final months, already discussing inheritance distribution while my wife was still breathing. She'd seen them pressure me to make financial decisions during my grief, taking advantage of my emotional vulnerability to gain access to accounts and investments. The immigrant perspective Maria brought to their behavior was particularly damning. She'd come to America with nothing, worked multiple jobs to support her family, and built a successful cleaning business through honesty and determination. Watching American-born citizens scheme to steal from their elderly father disgusted her in ways that went beyond simple moral disapproval. Their betrayal represented everything she'd hoped to escape by coming to this country. Maria's decision to come forward wasn't just about protecting me, though our friendship had grown genuine over the years. It was about justice and the principle that family obligations should flow both ways. She'd watched me support my children through business failures, divorce proceedings, and financial crises. She'd seen me pay for Emma's private school tuition when Michael couldn't afford it, and cover Linda's credit card debts multiple times. Their current betrayal was particularly offensive given my history of generosity. The social media storm that followed my live stream had already begun reshaping public opinion about elder abuse and family responsibility. The video had been shared across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from people sharing their own experiences with greedy relatives. Local news stations had picked up the story, treating it as a cautionary tale about vulnerable seniors and family predators. But Maria's evidence took the story to another level entirely. Her detailed documentation proved that my family's intervention wasn't a spontaneous response to sudden concerns about my competence. It was the culmination of years of planning, preparation, and increasingly aggressive attempts to gain control of my assets. Their supposed love and concern was revealed as a long-term financial strategy. The immigration angle added another layer of complexity that resonated strongly with current American political tensions. Here was an undocumented worker protecting an elderly American citizen from his own family's greed while politicians debated border security and deportation policies. Maria's moral courage highlighted the irony of native-born Americans betraying their own father while an immigrant housekeeper fought to protect him. Conservative media outlets picked up the story as an example of immigrant values surpassing American family loyalty. Liberal platforms used it to discuss elder abuse and the breakdown of traditional family structures. Immigration advocacy groups pointed to Maria's courage as evidence of the moral character that immigrants bring to American communities. The story transcended typical political divisions by focusing on universal themes of right and wrong. Maria's willingness to come forward despite her immigration status was particularly brave given the current political climate. She risked deportation by speaking publicly, drawing attention to herself and her family in ways that could have devastating consequences. But she'd watched my family's betrayal for years, and her conscience wouldn't let her remain silent when I needed support most. The evidence she provided filled crucial gaps in my case against my family's intervention. While my security cameras had captured their recent activities, Maria's documentation went back years, showing a pattern of predatory behavior that predated any claims of my declining competence. Her testimony established that their concerns about my welfare were fabricated, designed to justify theft they'd been planning since before my wife's death. Local law enforcement took Maria's evidence seriously, particularly given the national attention the case was receiving. Detective Sarah Chen, who'd been assigned to investigate the elder abuse allegations, found Maria's documentation far more comprehensive than typical witness statements. The combination of recorded conversations, photographic evidence, and detailed timeline created a prosecutable case that went far beyond family disputes. The district attorney's office was also paying attention not just because of the evidence quality, but because of the political implications. Elder abuse prosecution had become a priority issue as America's population aged, and this case offered an opportunity to demonstrate serious commitment to protecting vulnerable seniors. The media attention meant that any decision to pursue or dismiss charges would be scrutinized by national audiences. My family's response to Maria's revelations was predictably desperate. Michael hired a lawyer who immediately began attacking her credibility, questioning her immigration status, and suggesting that her testimony was motivated by hopes of remaining in the country illegally. Linda attempted to discredit Maria's character by claiming she'd stolen items from my house over the years, accusations that fell apart when I produced 12 years of glowing references I'd written for other potential employers. Sarah and Frank took a different approach, trying to paint Maria as a manipulative influence who'd turned me against my own family. They suggested that she'd been feeding me paranoid ideas about their motives, that her presence in my home represented a different kind of elder abuse. Their argument collapsed when investigators reviewed the timeline and realized that Maria's documentation began years before any intervention discussions. Emma, caught in the middle of this expanding conflict, became an unexpected source of additional evidence. Her 10-year-old perspective on her parents' behavior provided insights that adult witnesses might have missed. She remembered specific conversations, could identify when her parents started treating me differently, and had noticed changes in their behavior that aligned perfectly with Maria's documentation. The immigration debate that swirled around Maria's involvement actually strengthened my case by highlighting the contrast between her loyalty and my family's betrayal. While politicians argued about border security and deportation policies, here was a real-world example of an immigrant protecting an American citizen from exploitation by his own relatives. The optics were powerful and impossible to ignore. Media interviews with Maria revealed a thoughtful, articulate woman whose moral convictions had motivated her to risk everything for the sake of justice. Her broken English couldn't disguise her intelligence or her genuine affection for the family she'd served for over a decade. When reporters asked why she'd endangered herself by coming forward, her answer was simple: because it was the right thing to do. The evidence Maria provided also revealed the scope of my family's financial desperation. Bank records showed that Michael's business had been failing for over 2 years, that Linda's credit card debts exceeded $80,000, and that Frank's gambling problems had cost them their savings. Their intervention wasn't motivated by concern for my welfare. It was driven by their need for immediate access to money they hadn't earned. The investigation expanded as authorities realized they were dealing with a conspiracy rather than a family dispute. Multiple agencies became involved, from Adult Protective Services to the FBI's Elder Fraud Unit. What had started as a local case was becoming a federal investigation into organized elder abuse with potential immigration law implications. As the legal wheels began turning, I found myself grateful for Maria's courage and friendship. She'd risked everything to protect someone who'd treated her with respect and fairness over the years. Her evidence had transformed my situation from a family dispute into a clear-cut case of attempted financial exploitation. Together, we'd exposed my family's true character and ensured that their betrayal would have real consequences. The story continued to evolve across social media platforms, with millions of people following updates and sharing their own experiences with family betrayal and elder abuse. Maria had become an unlikely hero, an immigrant woman whose moral courage had protected an American family from itself. Her evidence would prove decisive in the legal battles ahead. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity on the morning of the competency hearing, with overflow crowds watching a live stream that had been set up to handle the national interest in my case. 3 months had passed since that birthday party revelation, and what had started as a family dispute had become a landmark case in elder abuse prosecution. Federal investigators had uncovered a conspiracy that went beyond simple greed, revealing a systematic plan to defraud me that violated multiple federal laws. Judge Patricia Williams had handled elder abuse cases for 15 years, but she'd never seen evidence this comprehensive or public interest, this intense. The courtroom gallery included local reporters, national media correspondents, immigration rights advocates, and dozens of seniors who'd driven from across the state to witness what they hoped would be justice for elderly Americans. Everywhere. Emma sat in the front row next to Maria Rodriguez, the two most important witnesses in my defense. My family entered looking like they'd aged a decade in 3 months. Michael's business had collapsed completely under the weight of negative publicity, with clients canceling contracts and suppliers demanding immediate payment. Linda had been forced to declare bankruptcy as creditors closed in on her mounting debts. Sarah had lost her job at a financial services company after her employer learned about her involvement in elder fraud. Frank was facing criminal charges in 3 states related to his gambling debts and fraudulent business practices. The prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. Assistant District Attorney James Morrison presented evidence that my alleged incompetence was entirely fabricated supported by medical evaluations that proved my mental acuity exceeded that of most people half my age. Independent psychological testing had confirmed that I possessed full decision-making capacity and showed no signs of dementia confusion or diminished cognitive function. But the most damaging testimony came from Emma herself, who'd been granted permission to speak as a minor witness with special protections. Her 10-year-old voice carried through the silent courtroom as she described overhearing her parents plan their intervention, practice their concerned expressions, and celebrate prematurely about their expected inheritance. Her testimony was heartbreaking and devastating, delivered with the painful honesty that only children possess. Maria Rodriguez testified for over 2 hours, presenting 12 years of documented evidence that demolished any remaining credibility my family might have claimed. Her detailed records showed that their supposed concerns about my welfare had emerged only after their own financial situations became desperate. The timeline was clear. Their intervention wasn't motivated by love, it was driven by debt and desperation. The federal charges expanded the case beyond simple elder abuse into conspiracy mail fraud and wire fraud territory. FBI investigators had uncovered communications between my family members and accomplices in other states, revealing a network of people involved in targeting elderly victims. My case had become part of a larger investigation into organized elder fraud that spanned multiple jurisdictions. During cross-examination, my family's attorney attempted to portray their actions as misguided concern rather than criminal intent. But the evidence was overwhelming, and their own recorded words contradicted every claim of innocent motivation. The jury heard Linda joking about my supposed senility, Michael calculating the value of my assets, and Frank discussing which possessions they'd sell first. Their own voices condemned them more effectively than any prosecutor could. The immigration aspect of the case had taken on national significance as politicians weighed in on Maria's courage and sacrifice. Her testimony had been given under special protection status, but she'd still risked everything to protect someone who'd treated her with dignity and respect. Conservative and liberal media outlets found rare common ground in praising her moral courage and questioning why native-born Americans had failed where an immigrant had succeeded. When the judge called for my testimony, I walked to the witness stand feeling every one of my 75 years but determined to have my say. I testified about building a construction business from nothing, raising 2 children I'd loved, despite their flaws, and watching my life's work being targeted by people who'd never earned anything themselves. My voice remained steady as I described the betrayal of discovering that my own children saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. The verdict was swift and unanimous. The jury found overwhelming evidence of attempted elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of multiple federal statutes. My family's claims of incompetence were dismissed as fabricated their intervention was ruled criminal rather than therapeutic, and their actions were condemned as a textbook example of financial elder abuse. The sentencing phase revealed the true scope of their crimes. Michael received 18 months in federal prison, Linda got 14 months, and Frank faced 3 years across multiple jurisdictions. Sarah received probation and community service largely because her cooperation with investigators had helped uncover the broader conspiracy network. The financial penalties included full restitution plus damages that effectively bankrupted what remained of their resources. But the most important outcome was the precedent established for protecting vulnerable seniors. The case had generated national attention about elder abuse, inspired legislation in multiple states, and created legal standards that would protect future victims. My live stream revelation had become a teaching tool used by social workers, law enforcement, and advocacy groups across the country. Emma's custody situation was resolved through family court proceedings that prioritized her well-being over her parents' rights. Given their criminal convictions and demonstrated willingness to use her in their schemes, the court awarded custody to my sister Dorothy, who'd been horrified by her nephew and niece's behavior. Emma would grow up knowing that speaking truth to power had consequences, and that standing up for what's right matters more than family loyalty when family members choose crime. Maria Rodriguez became an American citizen through a special provision that recognized her courage in exposing criminal activity. Her testimony had helped convict federal criminals and protect a vulnerable victim, qualifying her for expedited naturalization despite her previous undocumented status. She continued working as my housekeeper, but now she was also a national symbol of immigrant values and moral courage. The financial outcome restored everything my family had tried to steal, plus damages that reflected the emotional trauma they'd inflicted. My construction business assets remained under my control, my house stayed in my possession, and my retirement security was protected. More importantly, my reputation had been vindicated and my competence had been legally confirmed beyond any future challenge. As we left the courthouse that final day, Emma took my hand and looked up with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Grandpa," she said, "I'm glad you didn't let them win." Her simple statement captured everything that mattered. About the past 3 months of legal battles and public scrutiny, justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and family loyalty had been redefined to exclude criminal behavior. The story that began with a whispered warning at a birthday party had ended with federal convictions and landmark legal precedents. My family had learned that underestimating their father was the costliest mistake of their lives. They'd lost everything they'd tried to steal, destroyed their reputations, and faced years of consequences for their betrayal. The power of speaking truth. This story represents more than family drama or elder abuse. It's about the courage to stand up for what's right even when the people you love are doing wrong. Emma's whispered warning, Maria's documented evidence, and my decision to fight back all demonstrate that justice requires action, not just hope. In America today, we're facing challenges that require the same moral courage. Whether it's protecting vulnerable community members, standing up to corruption, or defending principles that matter more than personal convenience, each of us faces moments when we must choose between what's easy and what's right. The response to this story has been overwhelming, with thousands sharing their own experiences and finding strength in seeing that resistance is possible. If this story resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear that they're not powerless against those who would exploit them. Your support makes these stories possible and helps create a community where truth matters more than comfort, where justice is worth fighting for, and where ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept wrongdoing. Thank you for being part of this journey toward justice and accountability.